vakalevu, Taylor, for giving your time to have a quick Talanoa with me today. Thank you for joining Talanoa with Dr. T. To kickstart our Talanoa, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, Bula Teresi, thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be on your Talanoa with Dr. T show and to be interviewed by you, Teresi. So I'm Taylor Aumua. My mum is Fijian and my dad is Samoan. I am a journalist, so I work in the media here in West Auckland, New Zealand. And yeah, that's me, Teresi.
Oh, Vinaka. And also mentioning your mom's connection to Fiji, would you like to share a little bit more about her link to Fiji, especially through your bumbu? And if you have any memories of that part of the family while growing up in Aotearoa?
Yeah, so my mum always tells me, because I always ask my mum, where's my bumbu? Where's my mama from in Fiji? And she always says, just tell people you're from a village near the Waining Boka. So that's what I always tell people. So yeah, my mum, my link to Fiji is through my bumbu, so Tina Hancock. And to be honest, Teresi, for me, there's lots of memories I have of my Fijian grandma, but she passed away, I think, when I was 13 or 14. So there's still, for me, lots of things that I wish I spoke to her about. And part of me even, continually connecting with you is to regain that Fijian knowledge that I wish I learned from my grandma. So I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh, so memories of my bumbu. What do I remember? Man, so first of all, she made the best roast dinners. I remember coming to her home and she would always have like a roast lamb and the best mashed potatoes ready for us whenever we got home. What else do I remember from her? She was so gently spoken, but she was a really strong bumbu. And I remember growing up, she used to teach Fijian language classes in her later years. And I remember sitting in those classes. But one thing I really regret, Teresi, is not paying attention in those classes because I didn't realize how important they were back then. And I remember her introducing me to my Auntie Ma, who I've just spoken to you about. And my Auntie Ma still makes Fijian pottery. And I remember sitting in my grandma's backyard and learning with my Auntie Ma and learning how to make this pottery and the designs and patterns that went on the pottery. And so that's something I've grown up with, and my Auntie Ma is still someone I constantly try to connect with to learn this art form of pottery making. But like I said, Teresi, like growing up, my bumbu passed away, I think in 2006. So I never got to have this relationship with her as an adult and ask her stories about, my Fijian history and stories about her childhood and growing up. I think it's her roast dinners that I remember about her the most.
Yes, and I have to say that when I moved to New Zealand, I always hear about her name. I always hear about the work that she did, and I think I remember seeing some of the reports she wrote and some of the resources that she created back then, because I want to give credit to her and to Mrs. Winnie Duituturanga. She's also in her mid-80s, and they were really like the leaders at that time, trying to teach Fijian language to the younger Fijians, growing up. And then I came into the picture, and so it's like they left behind such a beautiful legacy that when I came into the picture to carry on that role, I knew I had huge responsibility, to take, because I heard about Yombumbu and I heard about Nawini Nduituturanga, and they are just amazing role models. And I have to say that I can challenge you now that it's not too late. You can take on the baton, and go back home and maybe retrace her steps. That will be amazing.
That's something I really want to do, Tarisi. And actually, just speaking on language, I remember talking to my mum, and I asked her like a few nights ago, I was like, why did you never learn Fijian, or why did you never teach Fijian? Because Mama, so I call her Mama, she used to teach Fijian language classes, but that wasn't until the later years of my Bumbu's life that she realized how important actually teaching the Fijian language was. Because before that, growing up in New Zealand, they weren't allowed to speak Fijian, or my Samoan dad, they weren't allowed to speak Samoan in New Zealand. And so my mama wanted to raise my mum as a New Zealander, and to be accepted into New Zealand society. And so that's why later on, my Fijian Bumbu started teaching Fijian language. I really wish, I really wish that was something that was passed on to me. And that is something I want to regain and learn.
Absolutely. So speaking about that, Taylor, what would be like your advice or your vision for younger Fijians or those of mixed heritage like you? I love speaking to young Pacific students when I was teaching at the University of Auckland, those of mixed heritage, because you were so unique. You were very special because you have a lineage that goes to one part of the Pacific, and another one goes this way, and another one, a couple more to different parts of the world, and that's very special. What is your vision about those young people listening to our Talanoa and heritage, and your suggestion or maybe your advice to them now on how they should view their own heritage?
I think, first of all, love it and accept it and embrace it and live and breathe it as much as you can. I think for me, growing up in New Zealand and growing up away from, well, not away from Fiji or Samoa, but just being brought up in New Zealand, a lot of my own culture wasn't passed down onto me. So the Fijian language wasn't passed down to me, the Samoan language wasn't passed down to me. And with that, a lot of our culture, our protocols, our history wasn't passed down onto me. And so now I'm 28 years old, and only in the last couple of years I've had this, and I don't think my story is different to many other, people like me that are growing up in New Zealand. But you have this awakening, and you realize how much of your own culture and knowledge has been stripped away from you. And so now for me, it's all about scrambling, trying to gain and trying to regain this knowledge that wasn't passed down onto me. And so, part of my work as a journalist is I'm so grateful that I'm able to work within the Pacific community and tell these Pacific stories, because that's part of me connecting with my Pacific community and learning about our history and culture and things like that. So my advice would probably be, if you're lucky enough to still have your own Bumbu that's still alive, or have your grandparents that are still alive, connect with them and talk with them and ask them about their childhood stories, growing up, what it was like back in the islands for them, what is their history, and ask them to teach you the language or take language classes. One of my biggest regrets is that my Bumbu passed away when I was 13 or 14 years old. And I had my relationship with my Bumbu was that of, like a normal grandmother. So she was a nurturer and a caretaker for me. But I never got to have a relationship with her as an adult and as kind of like a friend where you can just sit down and you can just tell stories to each other. And for me, I think that's what's kind of sparked my passion in now telling stories about, about Indigenous knowledge and our Fijian artifacts and things like that. With my Samoan grandma, I visit her regularly, and I sit down with my Samoan Nana, and I'm like, Nana, just tell me stories about your childhood. So she's told me about like her boyfriends and her first love that she met in Samoa, and then when she found out she had to come to New Zealand, what it was like saying goodbye and crying to each other, and her waving goodbye while she was on the boat, and him on the rock standing there waving. It's all these things you need to ask your family and your grandparents, because it's a part of who you are. And then if you have children and your children have questions, you can relay these same stories to them and pass on the same knowledge to them.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing your Samoan, side, for asking your grandma. That is so beautiful, and I think that's a really good encouragement. You are sharing with our young audiences who are listening in that if you have your grandparents that you have access to, ask them questions. Tell them to Talanoa. Even buy them have a little bit of maybe a cup of tea, or just sit down and just talk story. I'm sure a lot of our elders often say, oh, my grandchildren never asked, so it's usually the two worldviews clashing. It's the grandparents saying they never asked, or the young children or the younger ones say, oh, if I ask they may scold me. So I'm really glad that you're the one that are bridging that cultural gap there. So thank you for sharing that.
Because it's not until we're older, Teresi, where we kind of realize how much of our culture is lost. And sometimes when we have that awakening, it's too late. It's too late to speak to our grandparents. So if you're lucky to now, speak with them. And read about, read Teresi's book about archaeology and things like that, because our history and our artifacts are so, we never see it on TV, we never really see it published. Yes. But it's so fascinating. I remember, we were talking just before, Teresi, how I grew up fascinated by the Egyptian pyramids and things like that, but never by, never by Pacific archaeology, or how we were ocean navigators. So if you can become involved, or read about our history, our ancient history like that, I think it's also really important to understand where we came from and who we are.
Absolutely. I love what you said, the putting that Indigenous voice, and we need to empower each other, Taylor, that we need to tell our own stories. Sometimes we often wait for an outsider to come in to tell us how special we are, but we have so many traditions, and so many like the history of navigation, and that's why I invest in writing these bilingual books, even though they are small in because I'm targeting the younger generation. I want to start early, so that the younger Taylors can read and be proud that our grandmothers made this beautiful pottery that that their food was cooked in, because without that then they wouldn't eat. And so it's that Indigenous ingenuity that we need to write about, and I really admire the work that you do to Taylor, you being a journalist. What would be what are your thoughts in terms of your role as a journalist in sharing our own stories to our people? You've touched a little bit on that earlier, but can you add more to that?
Yeah, so I think, Teresi, like when I first became a journalist, my whole idea was to tell stories of our Pacific community, but tell them through a positive lens. I know we hear that story a lot, is that a lot of the stories that are published in mainstream media here in New Zealand shed a twisted or negative light on our Pasifika community here. And so that was my whole idea of coming into journalism. Now I think it's changed. I want to tell more stories about our Pacific artifacts and our Pacific history, because I think it's so important to have our stories told by us, by our own people and by Indigenous people, because I think even, Tarisi researching about, our archaeology and our artifacts, so much of that research is published and produced by people that aren't Fijian or aren't Pacific, and not Indigenous at all. And I'm not an archaeologist, Tarisi, but I know I've always wanted to be an archaeologist. But it really annoys me, and it gets under my skin that if I'm wanting to learn about my own culture and my own artifacts, why am I reading it by people that didn't grow up in Fiji, that don't speak the language, or people that aren't Indigenous or aren't Pacific? So that's why I think it's so important for me to work in this space and try tell as much of our stories as I can, collaborating with other Pacific and Indigenous voices. I think that's why journalism and storytelling for me is so important, and that's why I work in this role.
Wow, oh, that's beautiful. Thank you, Taylor, for sharing that. And I know there will be, the younger audiences listening in and looking at you as their role model. And we need more, people like yourself in the field of journalism to share the prehistory and history of the Pacific that needs to be told. Yeah. But I also heard, Taylor, that you've traveled around the world, and I think at one time you were somewhere in Europe. So can you tell me what inspired you to decide to pack your bags and travel?
What inspired me? Do you know what, Tarisi? I think it was I just wanted to explore. I wanted to see the world. It was at a time where, Tarisi, because archaeology has always been my first love. And long story short, I became a journalist, which I think in the long run was a good decision for me. But it was at a time where I was really lost. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so I decided to travel. And I went and saw, I went to Greece, and I saw like all the ancient sites and things there. I really just wanted to explore and see the world. Don't want to sound cliche, maybe find myself a little bit. And so that's why I did that, Tarisi. And we live in New Zealand, we live so far away from, we're on the other side of the world. I wanted to see what that side of the world looked like. But I think coming home now, like I said before, I was so fascinated by all these other cultures and, wanting to get away from New Zealand. I think now coming home, I've really appreciated how beautiful my own culture and my own heritage is here. And now more than ever during COVID, all I want to do is go back to the islands and see my family in the islands. I'm a lot more settled now, I think, and it took a lot of money and a lot of exploring to kind of figure out that how happy I am to be Pacific and how happy I am to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Taylor. And I think also, that saying, the pen is mightier than the sword. And I think you being a journalist and, you do a lot of writing, and I think you in the right space for our people. You can be able to create, documentaries, you can write, you can do lots of things. And I think, because not everyone can be archaeologists or not everyone can be journalists, but you are now. And then your first love, I'm sure, is still there. And you can still, make your first love, still, work together hand in hand with your journalism skills. And would you like to share what's your vision in the future on how you can connect these two together to benefit our people? So what I'm trying to work on now, and so for those who are watching, I just had a Talanoa with Tarisi about this earlier, about a project that I'm trying to do, focusing on lapita pottery, but mainly through my auntie who still lives in Fiji and still makes the pottery. And so for me, it was so important to tell
this story is still in its early stages, but it's so important for me to tell this story because, like I said before, it's part of me reclaiming that Indigenous knowledge and showcasing it, because my vision for the future is that people like me or my children don't have to grow up and spend all these years reclaiming that Indigenous knowledge that we lost. It'll be great for them just to be born into a world where they can flourish already with that Indigenous knowledge in them and present all around them. And so this project Teresi that I'm trying to produce around Lapita pottery and profiling my Auntie Ma who still makes it, is part of creating those resources for our children, or for, you know, just young people today who want to reclaim that Indigenous knowledge back, and want to learn about the history and the beautiful archaeology that the Pacific has. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Absolutely, I love that. I love the fact that you want to bring, you want to make these stories come alive, and I think that's very important. And I think the second one is you want to include your Auntie Ma's voice, because in many documentaries or any books that we've read before, as you alluded to earlier, it's written by someone else, telling the story, but this time around you want your Auntie Ma's voice to come through, and I think that's so powerful. And if you can get that off the ground, I'm sure you are opening this door of opportunities where there's so many stories in Fiji alone that needs to be told. There's so much history in Samoa, so much history in Tonga, in the Northern Pacific that is so rich. For example, the Nanmadol site, it's one of these megalithic site, and it is called the Venice of the Pacific. Even archaeologists don't even know how this huge megalithic site was created, and even the city, all made of stone, goes right into the ocean. And those are the stories that needs to be told by us, first of all for our people, and secondly for the people outside the region. How do you feel about that?
I'm excited, Teresi. For me it's fascinating. I do want to say, Teresi, though, I think the work that you do is amazing, and you've always been an inspiration for me in learning about these stories and also wanting to tell stories, tell these kinds of stories as well. For me, though, also learning about, all these stories at a later age, Teresi, for you, I don't know when you found out about all these ancient sites in the Pacific, but for me, it's quite sad that I didn't actually grow up knowing these in the first place. Even for me, like the dawn raids in New Zealand, I didn't learn about the dawn raids until my last year of high school or first year of university. So I think I was 18, 19, which I think is really late to learn about something like that happened, that my own nana lived through, and so although it's been a journey and a fascinating journey learning about my history and these archaeology sites in the Pacific, it's also quite sad that I'm only just learning about them now. It does excite me, though. It does excite me to finally try to shed some light on these stories, and hopefully one day I'll be able to see all these sites close up and learn from the people that have lived around these sites.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Taylor, for for sharing that, because the what you're doing now can encourage, and I'm glad you came on my platform, because there's a lot of young people all around the world that are following this program, and I'm sure there will be some videographer, there will be some amazing people out there who will watch this program, and I can tell them, please support the vision that Taylor has, who's really trying to go back to Fiji to tell the stories of the hardworking women, potters back in the province of Rewa, And also there's a lot of women, in the province of Nanronga. So these are the two provinces that are still actively making pottery, and the stories deserve to be shared. And so in that regard, I want to thank you, Taylor, for coming up with that vision. And I'm sure with the support of me and many others that we've talked about, it will come to fruition. And I look forward to post-COVID-19, that we can be able to fly over to Auntie Ma and record her stories and even sit there with her and make your own pot. And the next time that we're going to talk, I envision you like your mom holding your pot and showing me what you have created, right, with Auntie Ma.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yes, go for it.
Can I ask you a question before you wrap?
Yes.
But can I ask you why you became an archaeologist and why archaeology is important to you? Because you're my idol, Tarisi, so I'm taking this opportunity to ask you.
Vinaka Taylor. Well, see, it has to be a Taylor to ask me that. It has to be you. Well, for me, the interest of prehistory started off in my life at a very young age. So my mom was a really good storyteller, and I'm the youngest of 7 siblings, so I'm the only one that was born in Suva. My older siblings were born in Kandavu, where I'm originally from. And so I grew up in a town whereby my mom grew up in the islands. And so when she used to tell me stories, I have a very, my imagination can go very wild when she tells me all these stories, and I can visualize her telling me her going fishing. She'll be telling me how she used to go and collect firewood. She used to tell me all these amazing stories, and to me, instead of me reacting as a little girl telling her that it's boring, I did the opposite. I was fascinated with it. I was asking her, so mom, do you know which tree to collect? And even she told me how she used to she's a medicine woman too, so she can name all the trees, and she can tell me which tree that you have to use the leaves, and which tree you have to use the bark, and which tree you have to pull the root. And I'm a child that was like, why that tree, why? So and I was so happy that my mom never actually tell me to be quiet. She answered every question I had. And so that interest started off at a very young age. And then as I went through high school and when I went to university, I was really kind of focused to take a field that was embracing the environment and the history of the people. And then I ended up here in Hawaii as an exchange student. And then coming over to Hawaii opened my eyes to anthropology and archaeology. And then when I went back to Fiji, a role came up at the Fiji Museum that they were looking for a graduate trainee in archaeology, and I applied. And out of the 16 applicants, I think I heard I was the only undergrad and a woman at that, a young girl. I was chosen. And and so the rest is history, but I'm so glad that the Fiji Museum saw something in me. They saw the passion I had for my people. I knew at a very young age that we have such a very rich history, but coming through high school, I never see that. It's just like how you said it earlier. And so I was on a mission to go out there and dig and record all the oral history and share them. And so I think in a way, Taylor, I'm living that dream. And then now that we're living in the world of technology, instead of me going to Fiji to all the schools, I can sit in the comfort of my home in Hilo and tell the story through the screen. And so I went to Australia to do my postgraduate diploma in archaeology, Taylor, and I passed, and I went back and became the head of archaeology department. And we went all around Fiji doing excavations, and I have to acknowledge all the archaeologists that I worked with. Hiroshi Kiguchi from Japan, Christine Burke from Australia. They were the 2 archaeologists that trained me, and then I was able to train the other people in the Fiji Museum. I work together with Professor Dr. David Burley in Canada, Dr. Ethel Anderson in New Zealand, Dr. Jeffrey Clark. There's so many amazing archaeologists that I worked with, and I'm so indebted to them for their patience and for them, working with me, not only just me, but with my team, to work with the villagers all around Fiji, acknowledging our landowners as well for allowing us to excavate and find these amazing, archaeological findings. We're talking about lapita pottery. We're talking about shell ornaments, talking about stone adzes, amazing things that our own ancestors created. And so that actually encouraged me to create this book that I was showing you before.
Yeah.
And Talanoa lapita.
Trying to get hold of.
And then I kept the Talanoa till now with my Talanoa with Dr. T, because I love the storytelling style of sharing knowledge. The way my mother told me her Talanoa was so relaxing, and it was so engaging that after her Talanoa session, I was mesmerized. I felt so proud. I was like, oh my goodness, there's all this amazing stuff that my Mbumbu's made. They were amazing mat weavers, carvers, potters, and so here I am, 2020, to be able to be here to continue telling the story. So I hope I answer your question, Taylor.
Teresi, do you know what I find fascinating, and I know we spoke about this earlier, is that even for you growing up in Fiji, there's still artifacts that even you weren't taught at in school. And so it's awesome that you're bringing light on this as well. But Teresi, I do want to say as well, I just want to thank you because you're such a treasure to our Pacific community and like our Fiji community. You're such a knowledge holder, and I want to thank you for sharing so much of our history and sharing our language, because I know you taught the Fijian language here in New Zealand as well. And so just thank you for enriching us with the knowledge that you've found and the resources that you've created for us to learn as well, Teresi. Like, I think you're a magic woman. So I honestly, Teresi, it's such a privilege for me to talk to you about this. So I want to say thank you to you too for sharing stories about our own Fijian history as well.
Vinaka Taylor. I think I love sharing this because I believe in sharing this information to the younger generation, and I want to empower to use this platform to empower and to engage our young ones so that we can remind them on how such a beautiful heritage that we all belong to. And as you rightly said earlier, Taylor, with your field of journalism, there's always a negative twist, in some of our Pacific stories. But for me, I try and focus on the positive and to focus on the empowerment side, and empower our younger generation so that they can stand tall wherever they are. They can be in Germany, in Europe, in England, we have even Fijians in Mongolia of all places, Fijians in Japan, in Australia, New Zealand, and for them to say, I'm proud to be a Fijian, and they can be able to empower other young ones wherever they're from. They can, even the teachers in Mongolia, they are teaching the children of Mongolia about Fiji, and that is so special. And I'm sure,
really cool.
I know, it's so, very very moving and very touching, to see these teachers from Fiji in Mongolia, and for them being they ended up being like Fiji's ambassador. And I'm sure for you, Taylor, you are sort of like the ambassador of Samoa and Fiji, in your quest, in writing and sharing about our history as well. So to end our Talanoa today, Taylor, is there anything else you want to share to our younger listeners who maybe still, contemplating choosing their fields of study, what would be your advice to them in terms of following their passion or their dreams?
Oh, that's a hard one, Teresi, because I followed someone's advice to become a journalist, even though my passion was archaeology. Do you know what? All I can really say is do something. I hope this is good advice. Do something that you love doing, because if you want to, and the thing is that you're never stuck in a career your whole life. You're not just going to have one career. You're going to chop and change. So if you do make a mistake, then that's fine. You'll never just have one career or one job. But do something that you love doing. And I know people say choose something and it never feels like work. But also, if you do something you love doing, you can never stop working because you love doing it. But that's really all I can say is follow your passion and follow what you love doing. Because whatever you love doing, opportunities come from that, and your career really flourishes from what you love doing or what you're passionate about, because that becomes your heart work, or that becomes I don't know. I don't know how to explain it, but if you're passionate about something and you put hard work into it, you see the benefits of that. Not just for you, but for your community as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then I think at this point, I just want to wish you all the best for your project, the one you are working on with Auntie Ma. And definitely I feel that that will open up a lot of doors for you, Taylor, because apart from pottery itself, there's so much stories behind the scene. Even, for example, the harvesting of the resin, to actually put outside the actual pot, you have to know the kua tree. So there's botany, there's chemistry, there's a lot of science, behind it. And that's the beauty about this, Taylor, that our ancestors, they were scientists in their own right. They knew their trees, they knew how to read the stars, right, for navigation. They name the winds. That's something that it just blows my mind, It's kind of, wow, they have names for winds, they have names for swells and the waves. They have names for certain seasons of the year. And they name the seasons because of the flowering of certain plants, the arrival of certain fish, and that to me is, the beauty of why I'm putting Talanoa with Dr. T and bringing the stories of the birds and bringing the stories of the trees and all of these things, so that the children can visualize what these birds look like. And just to tell you a quick story as well, Taylor, this last week and this week I've been focusing on birds, so I decided to create a Manu Manu Vuka series. So I chose 5 birds, and then I look for the pictures, and I look at where they are found, where if they're endemic, why they're endemic into Fiji. Some birds can be found between Tonga, Fiji, and Samoa. And then I also looked at some about proverbs, Fiji idioms. For example, one of the birds, the Pacific golden plover, and the Fijians created a proverb out of it, and it made sense because it talks about it is impossible to see the eggs of the Ndilio bird. So the Fijian bird, the Fijian name is Ndilio. And I always wonder, when I was growing up, I always asked my mom, why is the Fijian idiom like that? And then when I was doing my research and I found out, now I get it. So our ancestors knew that this bird never lays their eggs in Fiji. Because the bird is a migratory bird. It actually lives in Alaska and Siberia.
Wow. See, it's little stories like this that you just find fascinating.
Exactly. And that's when I realized, oh my goodness, our ancestors knew the life cycle of this bird. They knew that this bird never lays their eggs in Fiji. So they created a proverb that says, if something is impossible, that means that kune kune, say in Fijian it sounds like this, kune kune naya loka nindilio. So if you translate that saying, it says, it is impossible to see the dilio eggs. So the reason is, it never lays eggs in Fiji. Isn't that beautiful?
See, I love hearing stories about this, Tadisi, because you're so right. It's like when you grow up listening, like in New Zealand, and you hear all these negative stories about, Pacific people in the media, and then you hear stories like this that you're sharing, on Talanoa with Dr. T. It just brings empowerment to you, especially for, young people growing up here. It's so amazing to hear about our ancestors and like their science, how they navigated, how the language is connected to the environment and to the land and the sea. That's amazing, Teresi. It's just so cool for me to hear stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's how for me, the reason, it's so lovely to have you and Mom join my classes in West Auckland, in Kelston. And for me, that's why I love teaching the language, and that's why I keep pushing for people to know the language, because I found out over, through, my language is not even perfect, my language use of Fijian, but I found out that knowing your indigenous language, it unlocks a lot of mystery and a lot of amazing knowledge that you will never have access to if you don't know the language. So that's why I'm challenging you and those of you who are listening in, who are sitting there thinking, should I learn Fijian or not? Or should I learn Samoan or not? The answer is yes. Do it. And it is amazing because the language, it's a language of the heart. It's a language, it's sort of like, I look at language, Taylor, as a gift from our ancestors. It's something that they've given you. And then now is your turn to open that gift. You're opening it up and then you're looking in and you're like, oh, wow. And that's how I teach my classes, in Auckland. When I teach my students, that's how I visualize it for them. So it's like your ancestor has given you this box and it's closed. So now you're coming to your first class. Now you're opening the top part of the box. And every week you come in, you're going to unpack it. You're going to unpack it. And you're going to unpack it. After 10 weeks, you will be renewed and reformed. And for some reason, a lot of students who are in my class, they change altogether. Even if I change one student in their way of viewing themselves, that's a huge success.
Okay, Tadisi, I'm going to take up your challenge then. I wish you were back in New Zealand though to take those classes again.
Yes, so the good thing, the good thing too, Taylor, the classes are now online and it's free.
Okay.
So go to the Pasifika Education Center website, register, and then you have 2 hours of classes every week for free. And you have a teacher called Amelia Tokalowere. She used to be a teacher in Fiji, so she's replaced me now. So she's amazing and she's wonderful and beautiful. She's from Laos. And register. Go and register now, and I will take you from here.
I am. So next time you talk to me, Teresi, hopefully I can string some sentences together for you.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Yeah. So wonderful. Wow. Yes, Vinaka Taylor for such a wonderful Talanoa, and it's really nice to I enjoy this kind of Talanoa because you empower me. I do the same for you, and it's just wonderful because I know you're going to go very far with your field of journalism, and I know your storytelling is going to grow from here, and I wish you all the best.
Vinaka Teresi, that means so much to hear that from you. Thank you. And thank you for having me on here.